The unraveling of a marriage and the quiet birth of betrayal. Douglas Ray had built an image for himself that he guarded almost obsessively: an accomplished Colorado entrepreneur with sharp instincts, an impressive real estate portfolio, and a spotless public reputation. For years, he enjoyed hearing colleagues describe him as a man who had everything under control. He believed it too. And for a while, his marriage to Harper Wynn had been part of that polished picture. Harper had once been the kind of woman who caught attention, effortlessly bright-eyed, articulate, endlessly patient, with a calm beauty that made people feel at ease just by being around her. But life does not respect perfect portraits. Harper's autoimmune disorder arrived gradually, then aggressively, reshaping both her body and the dynamic inside their house. What started as occasional fatigue soon turned into chronic exhaustion. Thick waves of hair that once framed her face fell out in clumps. Her once smooth skin became sallow, tight, and prematurely lined. Some mornings, she struggled simply to stand without trembling. Douglas never said out loud that he was repulsed, but the shift in him was unmistakable. The man who once held her hand during late-night walks now avoided touching her altogether. He timed his business meetings so he wouldn't have to escort her to events. And every time he introduced her to a partner or investor, he looked as though he wished she had stayed home. What Harper felt was not just illness, but the erosion of affection, subtle at first, then painfully explicit. Douglas, meanwhile, told himself a story that made betrayal feel rational. He deserved more, he told himself. He had worked too hard to be tied to someone who no longer enhanced his image. He pretended these thoughts weren't cruel, only practical. And with that convenient logic, he opened the door to Nova Lane. Nova was everything Harper no longer waysat, least in Douglas's eyes. She was energetic, photogenic, ambitious, and strategically flirtatious. Their first conversations happened at a promotional shoot for one of Douglas's luxury developments. Nova laughed at his jokes a little too easily, leaned in a little too close, and treated him as if he were far more impressive than he actually was. That alone was enough to electrify him. Their relationship escalated quickly into a secret romance. With Nova, Douglas felt young again, admired, desired, relevant. She made him forget the discomfort he felt when looking at his wife, whose frail appearance reminded him of vulnerability, responsibility, and moral obligation, three things he despised facing. But when divorce entered the conversation, reality slapped him with an inconvenience he refused to tolerate. Half of everything he owned legally belonged to Harper. Every property, every corporate share, every carefully crafted financial asset, Harper had legal claim to it. Douglas could not accept that. Divorce meant loss, and loss was something he had never tolerated in business or in life. He started imagining scenarios where Harper would voluntarily walk away. Of course, she never would, not intentionally. But Douglas carried a talent for inventing shortcuts, and as his greed grew, sympathy shrank. Nova never explicitly told him to get rid of Harper, but she also didn't discourage the idea. Her silence was permission, and her enthusiasm for a future with him only fueled his determination. In the quiet of late nights, Douglas paced his sleek living room, calculating, rewriting, and rehearsing the narrative he wanted the world to believe. Harper was sick. Harper was mentally unstable. Harper didn't want the burden of marriage anymore. He would paint himself as the suffering husband who had tried everything. He would emerge blameless. The assets would remain untouched. And Nova would become the wife of a wealthy, socially respected man. But Douglas understood one thing clearly: Harper would never agree to sign away her rights unless something changed drastically inside her mind. Something strong enough to silence her judgment, erase her memory, distort her reality. That was the seed of his plan, small at first, then poisonous, then unstoppable. He began researching quietly: experimental neurological suppressants, banned substances, chemicals used in early pharmaceutical trials. He browsed underground forums, contacted obscure suppliers, and spent nights reading clinical notes about cognitive degradation. The more he read, the more emboldened he became. And once he discovered a compound known for rapidly damaging short-term memory and executive function, the decision was shockingly easy. He didn't think about consequences. He didn't think about the cruelty. He only thought about winning. By the time he finalized the plan, Harper was sleeping more hours than she was awake, unaware that the man moving calmly around their home, preparing her meals and adjusting her pillows, was quietly transitioning from husband to predator.
Douglas felt no guilt, only anticipation.
He believed the universe had granted him an opportunity to reshape his life. All he had to do was ensure Harper never realized what was happening until it was far too late. The calculated poisoning and the signature he needed. Douglas Ray moved forward with his plan as though he were handling a business merger quietly, confidently, and without hesitation. Once he had secured the banned neurological suppressant through a discreet supplier who dealt in experimental compounds, he stored the vial in a locked desk drawer inside his private home office. No one, not even Nova, knew exactly what he had obtained. She didn't ask. She didn't want details. Her silence was, once again, his permission. For weeks, Douglas studied Harper's routines with a clinical detachment that unnerved even himself. He observed when she took her medication, when she slept deeply, when she was too weak to question anything he placed in front of her. Her illness had already robbed her of energy and clear thinking. He simply intended to push her far enough that she could no longer legally or mentally defend herself. But he didn't rush.
Douglas understood timing.
He understood image management. He understood that to make the deception believable, he needed to create the illusion that he still cared about his wife, that he was trying to support her during her decline. So he temporarily adopted the mask of a devoted husband. He brought Harper tea in the evenings. He sat beside her in bed while she struggled to read. He cooked meals he hadn't prepared in years. Neighbors who occasionally glimpsed him carrying groceries inside believed he was stepping up as a caretaker. Had they looked deeper, they might have noticed his eyes never softened when he watched Harper struggle. The night he decided to proceed felt eerily ordinary. Harper lay in bed, exhausted from another day of symptoms that left her speech slow and her movements uneven. Douglas entered the kitchen, reached for a pot, and began preparing a vegetable soup, her favorite comfort food. He had made it many times during the early years of their marriage, back when he still found joy in the small rituals of domestic life. The familiarity of the recipe helped mask the danger he was about to introduce. When the soup was nearly done, he retrieved the vial from his office. He hesitated only briefly, not out of guilt, but to ensure the dosage was exactly as described. Enough to impair cognition, not enough to kill. He poured the liquid into the steaming broth and watched it dissolve without a trace. No odor.
No color.
No clue. He carried the bowl to the bedroom with a gentle smile that felt foreign on his face. "Thought you might need something warm," he murmured. Harper thanked him softly, unaware that the man standing beside her was calculating how long it would take for her mind to unravel. She ate slowly, her hands trembling more than usual. Douglas sat on the edge of the bed and pretended to scroll through emails, though he wasn't reading. He was waiting. Within 30 minutes, Harper's speech began to slip. She repeated herself. She lost track of what she had been saying. Her eyes darted around the room as if the walls were shifting. "Doug, something's wrong," she whispered. He placed a hand on her shoulder in a rehearsed gesture of concern.
"You just tired, Harper.
Try to relax." But she was not tired. The drug began disabling her short-term memory like someone quietly erasing chalk from a board.
Minutes blurred.
Awareness dimmed. Even the concept of fear became fragmented, floating just out of her cognitive reach. Once Douglas judged that she was fully disoriented, He retrieved the documents he had prepared days earlier. The packet included a statement of voluntary forfeiture of marital property, a waiver of spousal support, and a clause indicating Harper wished to dissolve the marriage, to relieve her husband of emotional burden due to her terminal decline. Every sentence was crafted to sound as though it came from Harper herself, though she would never have chosen those words. Douglas placed a pen in her hand.
Just sign here, sweetheart.
It's paperwork for your medical decisions.
Routine stuff.
You don't need to worry. Harper stared at the page as though it were written in a foreign language. Her pupils were unfocused, her comprehension fractured. Her hand twitched weakly. When she failed to grip the pen properly, Douglas steadied her fingers between his, guiding them. "It's okay," he said softly, though his voice carried no warmth. "Just sign here. Right here." Her signature, once elegant and looping, transformed into a jagged line barely legible but legally present. Douglas repeated the process on several more pages, guiding her trembling hand again and again. Each page stripped her of another right, another asset, another protective barrier. By the time she set the pen down, Harper's breathing had grown shallow. Her eyes drifted. She no longer recognized the gravity of what she had done. Douglas gathered the documents with the care of someone handling priceless art. He slipped them into a folder, slid the folder into a briefcase, and locked it with a click that echoed in the silent room. The next morning, while Harper lay disoriented and barely functional, he submitted everything to his attorney. His calmness during the consultation impressed the legal team. He portrayed himself as a devastated husband, respecting his wife's wishes to step away from the marriage due to her deteriorating mental state. Nobody questioned his narrative. Nobody questioned the signature. It took less than 3 weeks for the divorce to finalize. Douglas celebrated the closing of the case by scheduling a private ceremony with Nova. He spun a sympathetic story for acquaintances. Harper had chosen solitude to cope with her debilitating illness. Most people believed him. Others didn't bother questioning a man who donated generously to community causes and never raised his voice in public. Once the wedding with Nova was complete, Douglas turned Harper into a problem to be managed. He moved her out of the master bedroom into a neglected storage shed behind the Hoshan area he claimed was temporary accommodation while he renovated. In reality, it was where he intended her to disappear from sight and mind. Harper, still suffering the neurological effects, didn't have the clarity to understand she had been exiled from her own life. She accepted her new surroundings with bewilderment, not resistance. And Douglas, pleased with how easily everything had unfolded, felt untouchable. Posing as a compassionate husband had taken effort. But erasing Harper from the picture? That part, he thought, had been almost too easy. Life in the shed, humiliation, hunger, and the slow breaking of a person. The shed behind Douglas's property had once stored garden tools, paint cans, and broken patio furniture. No insulation, no heating, a single flickering bulb dangling from exposed wiring. It was never meant for living, not even for an animal, yet it became the place where Harper was forced to exist, drifting through her days like a ghost trapped in the shell of her own life. Douglas did not move her belongings there. He didn't bother with bedding or clothing. He simply guided her, half confused and shivering, toward the small wooden structure and told her it would be temporary. She believed him because her mind, weakened and fogged by the neurological suppressant, could no longer process deception. Her trust had become a fragile, hollow thing, easily exploited and easily controlled. Inside the shed, the air felt damp and stale. Dust floated like ash whenever she breathed. The single window was cracked, letting in a constant draft that made her thin frame tremble uncontrollably at night. The cement floor grew painfully cold after sunset, pressing its chill into her bones. When it rained, the roof leaked.
When the wind blew, the walls shook.
At first, Harper tried to make sense of her surroundings. Why wasn't she in the house? Why did Douglas lock the shed from the outside for safety? Why did Nova laugh every time Harper asked if she could come in and rest? But the drug inside her system continued eroding her clarity. Thoughts slipped away mid-sentence. Memories dissolved before she could grasp them. She could no longer piece together timelines or understand why she was being treated like a burden. Her illness made her vulnerable. The drug made her defenseless.
Douglas exploited both.
He visited the shed at night not with blankets, medicine, or kindness, but with a detached cruelty wrapped in fake pity. "You're better out here," he insisted. "The house is too stressful for you.
You need quiet."
The words sounded gentle, but the tone carried superiority, finality, a warning wrapped in softness. Nova, however, didn't hide behind gentle tones. She appeared in the doorway with crossed arms, smirking like someone inspecting a discarded object. "Look at her," Nova scoffed one evening. "She doesn't even know where she is." Harper didn't understand the insult, but she recognized the hostility. Her eyes would drop, shoulders curling inward as though she could shrink out of existence. Nova delighted in those moments, savoring the odd, inappropriate satisfaction of dominating someone who couldn't fight back. Food became the next form of control. Douglas didn't want Harper dead yet. But he wanted her weak enough to be forgettable, silent, and dependent. He began reducing her meals, bringing her nothing more than scraps, crackers, or half-eaten leftovers. Sometimes Nova delivered the food, sometimes Douglas tossed it through the door without stepping inside. Eventually, Douglas introduced the most degrading step. He replaced her meals with cheap dog food. The first time he carried the metal bowl to the shed, Harper blinked at it with confusion, unable to understand why the smell was unfamiliar and sour. She tried to ask what it was, but her words slurred. "It's nutritious," Douglas insisted with mock reassurance. "Plenty of protein.
You'll be fine."
She hesitated, lifting the bowl weakly. "Doug, this isn't right." That was when Nova stepped forward, her voice sharp and impatient. "Either she eats it or she starves," she snapped. "She should be grateful you're feeding her at all." Harper swallowed hard, her throat burning with humiliation. Hunger overpowered dignity. The moment she leaned forward and took her first bite, Nova burst into laughter, a triumphant, spiteful sound that echoed inside the cramped shed. After that night, feeding Harper dog food became a ritual for the couple. Douglas treated it like a task to check off his list. Nova treated it like entertainment. She mocked Harper's posture, her trembling hands, her slow chewing. Anything that could be used to humiliate her became fair game. Some evenings, the couple stood far enough from the doorway to avoid the cold but close enough to observe her suffering. Douglas sometimes recorded short clips on his phone, not to post online but to share privately with Nova, as if documenting proof of their control. It thrilled him to know he had reshaped reality so thoroughly that Harper no longer recognized she was being abused. She simply endured it, floating through the days with a vacant gaze and increasingly sunken cheeks. As the neurological drug continued damaging her cognitive pathways, Harper began losing her sense of self. Words escaped her. Time became meaningless. She didn't know if minutes or hours had passed between meals. She didn't know what she had signed, what she had lost, or why she felt so deeply afraid every time the shed door creaked open.
Every morning, she woke up colder than the night before.
Every night, she went to sleep hungrier than the day before. Her body weakened, her skin grew grayish, and her eyes hollowed out like a shadow of the woman she once was. And yet, inside the fading corners of her mind, a faint instinct still tried to surface, a quiet whisper telling her something was terribly wrong. She didn't know what. She didn't know why. She didn't even know how to articulate it. But she felt it. A slow, aching dread that grew heavier each day. Douglas didn't notice. Nova didn't care. Harper Wynne, once vibrant, brilliant, and beloved, had been reduced to a forgotten figure in a backyard shed, surviving on humiliation and the faint hope that someone somewhere might still remember she existed. That hope, fragile as it was, would become the thread that changed everything. The attorney's sister who saw the truth and began the war for justice. Evelyn Wynne had always been the kind of woman who noticed small shiftstones in a voice, pauses in a conversation, a hesitation that didn't belong. It was a skill that served her well as a Denver attorney, someone who had spent years defending clients whose stories were often dismissed or distorted. But nothing in her career had prepared her for the creeping dread she felt when weeks passed without a single coherent message from her sister Harper. Harper had always checked in. Even during her worst flare-ups, even when she could barely lift her head, she somehow managed a text, a brief voicemail, a quiet assurance, "I'm okay, Evie. Just tired." But then the updates stopped. At first, Evelyn assumed the illness had simply worsened. But each unanswered call multiplied her anxiety. And when Douglas replied to one of her texts with a short, clipped message, "Harper needs space right now. She's not well mentally," Evelyn felt something inside her twist sharply. Harper would never ask for space. Harper had never been mentally unstable. And Douglas had never spoken so curtly before. The words were wrong. The situation felt wrong.
Everything felt wrong.
So Evelyn drove down to Douglas's property unannounced, determined to see her sister with her own eyes. The moment she stepped out of her car, she sensed the atmosphere was off. The backyard, once lively with garden beds Harper used to tend, looked neglected. Tools lay scattered as if abandoned mid-task. The windows of the house were closed, curtains drawn in a way that felt unnatural, like secrets hiding behind fabric.
She rang the doorbell.
Douglas answered after a long delay, wearing a polished smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Evelyn," he said, feigning surprise.
"This is unexpected."
"I came to see Harper," she replied, her voice steady. He stepped outside, blocking the doorway slightly. "She's resting. The disease has taken a toll mentally and emotionally. It's best if she's not disturbed."
Evelyn's skin prickled.
He was speaking too cleanly, too smoothly, like someone narrating a rehearsed performance. "I'm her sister," she said.
"Let me see her." Douglas hesitated.
And in that sliver of hesitation, Evelyn saw truth. Fear. Guilt.
A flicker of panic.
Before he could form an excuse, a faint sound drifted from the direction of the backyard, a weak, muffled cough. Evelyn turned sharply. What was that? Douglas opened his mouth, but she didn't wait for an answer. She strode past him, her heels crunching over dead leaves as she followed the sound toward the old shed at the far end of the yard.
"Evelyn. She is not done. Go back there."
Douglas shouted. But she was already moving faster. When she reached the shed, her hand trembled as she pulled the latch. The smell hit her, first a mixture of damp wood, mold, and something sour like spoiled food. Then her eyes adjusted to the dim light. And she froze. Harper was curled on the cement floor, wrapped in a thin blanket that did nothing against the cold. Her hair, once full and golden brown, hung in brittle strands. Her cheekbones jutted sharply from her gaunt face.
Her lips were cracked, her hands shaking uncontrollably.
Her eyes, those warm, thoughtful eyes, looked dazed and distant, as if she were struggling to recognize reality.
"Harper," Evelyn whispered, voice breaking.
Harper lifted her head slowly, as though the motion required incredible effort. "Evie," she murmured, barely audible. Evelyn knelt beside her, horror flooding her system. She brushed a hand over her sister's forehead, feeling the coldness that no human should ever feel indoors.
"My God," Evelyn breathed.
What did they do to you? Harper tried to speak, but her words came out fragmented. He said I had to stay out here. Evelyn's eyes flooded with tears, not of sorrow, but of fury. A protective fire ignited deep inside her chest. Never in her life had she wanted to destroy someone as much as she wanted to destroy Douglas in that moment. Behind her, footsteps approached. Douglas stood at the doorway, face tight with irritation. You shouldn't be here, he said sternly.
She gets confused.
She asked to stay out here. You're upsetting her. Evelyn rose slowly, her expression calm in the way only a trained litigator could manage.
No.
What's upsetting her is whatever the hell you've done. Douglas's jaw tightened. Evelyn took one step toward him, never breaking eye contact. I'm taking her with me. She can't leave, he insisted. The doctors said. What doctors? Evelyn snapped. You haven't taken her to a real checkup in months.
Douglas stiffened.
That was his mistake. Evelyn caught the micro-expression instantly. She turned back to Harper, supporting her frail body as she helped her stand. Come on, Harp. I've got you. Harper leaned heavily against her, unable to walk without assistance. As Evelyn guided her out of the shed, Douglas repeated his protest louder, more desperate.
She is unstable.
You can't just take her like this. Evelyn didn't even look at him as she passed. You and Nova are done making decisions for her. Once Harper was safely inside the car, Evelyn locked the doors and dialed a private medical clinic she trusted deeply, one that specialized in confidential treatment and protective custody for vulnerable patients. Within minutes, she was speeding down the main road, leaving Douglas fuming in his driveway. Harper fell asleep against the seatbelt, her breathing shallow. Evelyn kept glancing at her, chest tightening each time she noticed another bruise, another scratch, another sign of neglect. She whispered, not expecting Harper to hear. I'm here now.
I promise you're not going back there.
Ever again. At the clinic, doctors rushed Harper into immediate evaluation. Blood work, neurological scans, toxicology panels. Evelyn ordered everything, insisting money was no concern. But when the initial results arrived, even the medical team seemed stunned. Foreign neurotoxic compounds.
Severe Malnutrition.
Cognitive impairment inconsistent with her underlying illness. Evelyn felt her stomach twist. Someone had deliberately harmed her sister. As Harper was moved into a private recovery suite, Evelyn stepped into a quiet hallway, pulled out her phone, and opened a secure digital vault. One by one, she began uploading the evidence she already possessed: photos from the shed, recordings of Harper's incoherent speech, copies of Douglas's texts, timestamps of every missed call. Then she began planning something much more intricate. She contacted a handwriting analyst to examine the divorce documents. She reached out to neighbors discreetly to ask if they had ever seen Harper outside. She searched Douglas's purchase history, subpoena ready, for strange orders or chemical shipments. She called former gardeners, cleaning staff, and maintenance workers, gathering testimonies about anything unusual occurring on the property after Harper fell ill.
Every detail mattered.
Every inconsistency was a thread she would pull until the entire fabric of Douglas's lies unraveled. As she compiled notes, her resolve hardened like steel. Douglas Ray had underestimated one crucial thing. Harper had a sister who understood exactly how to dismantle a monster. Evelyn closed her laptop only when the first hints of sunrise brushed across the sky. She stood, rolled her shoulders back, and walked to Harper's room. Her sister lay quietly, hooked to 4 fluids, her face slightly more relaxed than before. Evelyn sat beside her and whispered the vow that would shape everything that followed.
Rest now, Harper.
I'll take care of the rest. I'm going to bring him down piece by piece. The failed ambush, the narrow escape, and the legal strike that changed everything. Evelyn Wynne had always been cautious by nature, but after rescuing Harper from the shed and uncovering the first layers of Douglas Ray's brutality, her instincts sharpened into something almost feral. She slept lightly, double-checked every lock, encrypted every digital file, and stored physical evidence in 3 separate locations: one at her law office, one in her apartment's fireproof safe, and one with a trusted colleague at the Colorado Legal Defense Bureau.
She knew Douglas.
She knew his pride. She knew his greed. She knew the dangerous lengths men like him were willing to go to when cornered. And Douglas was cornered. The moment he realized Harper had been removed from his control and placed in a private medical facility, his carefully constructed narrative began to crack. He panicked, not outwardly, not in ways that his neighbors or associates would notice, but internally, where desperation festered quietly and dangerously. Evelyn's presence threatened everything.
The fraudulent divorce.
The stolen assets. The abuse. The poisoning.
The persona he built.
He had underestimated her critical, irreversible mistake. So he did what men who fear exposure often do. He turned to the shadows. Douglas contacted a man known only through whispers in certain business circles, someone who specialized in solving problems discreetly. No official name, no public face, only a reputation built on intimidation, accidents that weren't accidents, and threats that never needed to be repeated. Douglas didn't specify that he wanted Evelyn killed. He didn't have to. He only said, "I need her stopped. I need those files gone. Permanently." The man replied with 2 words, "Consider it handled."
The stalking begins.
For several days, Evelyn noticed nothing unusual. She moved between her office and the clinic with precision, checking on Harper in the mornings and evenings, spending her days gathering evidence, contacting experts, building the most airtight case she had ever prepared. But late one Thursday night, while driving home from a meeting with a forensic toxicologist, she noticed headlights in her rearview mirror, not unusual in itself, but the same vehicle had been behind her through 5 consecutive turns. A dark SUV.
Windows tinted.
No plates on the front bumper. Her pulse quickened. She made another turn, this time down a different route than her normal routine. The SUV followed.
She exhaled slowly, steadying her breath. Panic was dangerous.
She needed clarity. Evelyn pressed her thumb against her steering wheel, activating her car's voice command emergency mode. "Call Marcus," she said. Marcus Holler, a colleague, former prosecutor, and one of the few people she trusted with her life. He picked up instantly.
"EV?
What's wrong?" "I'm being followed," she said quietly.
Black SUV. No front plates. Mile 7 heading north. Stay on the line.
Head toward the main strip somewhere with lights. Keep moving." She did exactly that, merging onto a well-lit commercial road dotted with gas stations and convenience stores. But the SUV didn't back off. It grew bolder, closing the distance, edging dangerously near her bumper. "They're not trying to scare you," Marcus said, voice tightening. "They're trying to box you in." A swell of cold terror washed through her, but Evelyn's training kept her focused. She accelerated. The SUV accelerated. She cut sharply into a service road. The SUV followed. "Ev," Marcus said, "I'm calling police dispatch. Keep driving, don't stop." But the attackers had their own plan. As she approached a stretch of abandoned warehouses, the SUV surged forward, attempting to force her off the road. Evelyn swerved, her tires skidding across gravel as she fought to control the steering wheel. Her heart thumped violently, but her mind remained clear. She scanned the area. Dark. Empty. Except a small open gate led to a fenced storage lot. If she could get inside, block the entrance, she might buy precious seconds. She yanked the wheel, sped into the lot, and slammed her car to a stop behind a row of large containers. Her hands trembled as she locked the doors and killed the engine. The SUV roared past the entrance, overshooting the turn.
Seconds mattered.
Breathing hard, Evelyn crouched low in her seat. Marcus was still on the phone.
EV?
Talk to me.
I lost them for now.
Where are the police? They're en route. Stay hidden. But the relief didn't last. The SUV circled back. Evelyn's stomach dropped as the vehicle slowed, creeping toward the lot entrance like a predator sniffing out prey. Flashlights flickered inside the cabin. She could almost hear her heartbeat echoing. She whispered into the phone, "If anything happens, everything's in the secure vault. Every file. Every testimony." "Nothing's going to happen," Marcus said fiercely.
Just stay down.
Officers are 3 minutes out. 3 minutes was an eternity.
The SUV inched forward again until distant sirens cut through the night air.
Red and blue lights approached fast. The SUV jerked violently, its driver turning off the headlights before speeding away into the darkness. Police vehicles tore onto the road seconds later, but the attackers had vanished into a web of industrial side streets. Evelyn didn't move until an officer's knuckles rapped gently on her window.
"Mom, you safe.
You can open the door." She unlocked the car with shaking hands. Safe. But shaken. And undeniably enraged.
The aftermath, a warning and a weapon.
At the station, the officers took her statement, documented her description of the vehicle, and opened an investigation into attempted intimidation and potential assault. But Evelyn already knew who had sent them.
Douglas Ray.
He was done hiding behind polite smiles and concerned husband performances. Now he was operating with the desperation of a man watching his empire crack. But here was his miscalculation. Threatening Evelyn didn't frighten her, it weaponized her. By the time she arrived back at her apartment, she had made 2 decisions. She would file her case against Douglas first thing in the morning. No more delays. No more strategy adjustments. The evidence was already overwhelming. She would add the attempted attack to the case, turning it into a clear pattern of obstruction, coercion, and criminal intent. Through the night, Evelyn compiled her documents, photographic evidence, toxicology reports, medical analyses, witness statements, digital timestamps, and preliminary handwriting comparisons showing the divorce signatures were likely forged or made under severe cognitive impairment. She didn't sleep. Didn't blink. Didn't stop. At dawn, she walked into the courthouse wearing the calm, professional resolve of someone who had already won. She filed a criminal complaint for abuse and poisoning,
A petition for asset recovery. A motion to invalidate the divorce documents.
a request for immediate investigation into financial fraud, and a report on the attempted ambush. Each stamped form, each notarized signature, tightened the noose around Douglas Ray's carefully hidden crimes. By mid-morning, the case was officially opened. Douglas, for the first time, would face the full force of the law, something he could not bribe, charm, or intimidate. The moment of shift. Standing on the courthouse steps, Evelyn finally allowed herself to breathe deeply.
The air was crisp. The sun bright enough to sting her eyes.
She closed them briefly, imagining Harper safe in her recovery suite. Then she made one final vow, spoken aloud though no one stood beside her.
Douglas, you never hurt her again. I'm coming for everything you stolen, everything you fear.
It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. One the justice system would soon enforce. The trial that shook the state, the fall of Douglas Ray, and Harper's return to herself. The case Wynne versus Ray quickly became one of the most talked about legal battles in Colorado. Within days of Evelyn filing the charges, news outlets began to circulate whispers of a wealthy businessman accused of poisoning his ill wife, stealing her assets, and orchestrating intimidation attempts against her attorney sister. Though the media had only fragments of the truth, the public's imagination filled in the gaps. A storm was forming, one powerful enough to expose every lie Douglas Ray had ever built his empire on. But for Evelyn, the media coverage meant nothing. She cared only about one thing: securing justice for Harper. The courtroom becomes a battlefield. The first hearing took place in a packed courtroom. Rows of reporters filled the benches, scribbling notes and adjusting their cameras. Supporters of Evelyn and Harper sat quietly, their expressions tense. On the opposite side, Douglas arrived with a team of high-profile defense attorneys, dressed in an immaculate suit, jaw clenched but still trying to project control. Nova came too, though her expression betrayed crack's fear, uncertainty, and the dawning realization that she would not walk away untouched. When Harper entered, escorted gently by medical staff, the entire room fell silent. She looked fragile, but no longer broken. Her cheeks had regained a faint color, her hair pulled back neatly, her posture supported by days of nutrition and care. Though her memory had not fully recovered, she could speak clearly again. She recognized Douglas not with affection, but with confusion mixed with quiet sorrow. It was the first time she had seen him since the shed. Douglas refused to meet her eyes.
Evelyns Käs unfolds like a Präzision Stricke.
Judge Harriet Cole, known for her intolerance of manipulation, presided over the case. She watched every witness carefully, every argument critically. Evelyn opened with a steady, commanding voice. "Your Honor, this is not simply a divorce dispute. This is a case of calculated abuse, criminal poisoning, document fraud, financial exploitation, and attempted obstruction of justice."
Every action Mr.
Ray took was designed to silence, weaken, and erase my sister. Then began the evidence presentation.
1.
The toxicology reports. A medical toxicologist testified that Harper's blood contained a banned neurotoxic suppressantone not available through hospitals or legal pharmacies. "This substance does not occur naturally," the expert stated. "Someone with knowledge and intention administered it."
The courtroom murmured.
Douglas visibly swallowed.
2.
Photos and videos from the shed. When Evelyn displayed photos of Harper's living conditions, the damp floor, the cracked window, the metal bowl containing cheap pet food, the room erupted in quiet gasps. Nova's face drained of color. Douglas shifted uncomfortably, clenching his jaw as though physical restraint alone could keep him from reacting. Judge Cole leaned forward.
"Mr.
Ray, is this where your wife was kept after your remarriage?" Douglas's attorney attempted to intervene, but the judge cut him off. "I asked the defendant."
Douglas stuttered.
She wanted space. She said the house. "Enough," the judge snapped. "The court sees through that."
3.
The handwriting analysis. A forensic handwriting expert compared the signatures on Harper's divorce documents with verified samples taken before her decline. The conclusion was irrefutable. These signatures were made by a person under severe neurological impairment. They are legally invalid. Douglas's attorney tried to object, but the judge overruled him.
4.
Testimony from neighbors and former employees. One neighbor testified. "I saw him bring food out there, but it wasn't meals, it looked like dry kibble. I thought maybe they had adopted a dog."
"I never imagined."
A former gardener admitted. "We were told not to go near the shed. Nova said it was unsafe. But one day I heard crying from inside." Each testimony tightened the web around Douglas and Nova, binding them with their own cruelty. The failed hit order, the final blow. When Evelyn testified about the attempted ambush, the courtroom grew still. She described the SUV, the chase through industrial roads, the circling, the flashlights, the near collision, the sirens. The prosecution presented police reports confirming the incident. Judge Cole's expression hardened visibly. She turned to Douglas, her voice sharp. "Did you instruct anyone to harm Ms. Wynne or interfere with her investigation?" Douglas clung to silence, but it was the wrong choice. Silence in that room was as damning as a confession. The verdict that made headlines. After 3 weeks of testimony, evidence, and cross-examinations, the courtroom gathered for the verdict. Harper sat between Evelyn and a medical specialist, hands trembling slightly but steadier than ever before. Nova stared at the floor. Douglas stared straight ahead, jaw tight, mask cracking. Judge Cole delivered the judgment slowly, clearly, leaving no ambiguity. "Douglas Ray, you are hereby found guilty of aggravated domestic abuse, administration of a prohibited neurotoxin, fraudulent coercion, falsification of legal documents, financial exploitation, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. You are sentenced to 30 years in state prison, without eligibility for early release." A sharp gasp spread across the room. Douglas's shoulders collapsed. Then came Nova's turn. "Nova Lane," the judge continued, "you are found guilty of complicity in the abuse of a vulnerable adult and will serve a 5-year sentence."
Nova burst into tears, her glamorous composure gone.
Douglas glared at her, betrayal flashing across his facias if she, too, had somehow failed him.
The return of Harper Wynne.
After the sentencing, Evelyn and Harper walked out of the courthouse into a warm afternoon. Cameras flashed. Reporters called out questions. But Evelyn kept her arm around her sister, shielding her, guiding her through the chaos like a pillar of calm strength. Once they were safely inside the car, Harper leaned her head against the window, breathing deeply. "It's over," Evelyn whispered. Harper closed her eyes. "I didn't think I'd ever feel safe again." "You are safe now," Evelyn said. "And everything he stole, your home, your money, your life, will be returned to you." It wasn't just a promise. It was already in motion. The state ordered restitution. Every asset Douglas had seized through fraud was transferred back to Harper. Lawyers assisted her in reclaiming property titles, financial accounts, and legal records. But the real restoration happened inside her, not in bank accounts or deeds. As the months passed, Harper's health improved steadily. Her memory returned piece by piece, like pages being restored after a fire. Her appetite came back, filling out her frame. Her voice, once frail and trembling, grew stronger and more assured. The scars remained emotional, psychological, physical, but they became part of a story she survived, not a story that defined her. Evelyn stayed by her side through every appointment, every therapy session, every moment of doubt. One evening, Harper stood in the doorway of her newly restored home, the sun dipping behind the Colorado mountains. She breathed in the warm air, her eyes shining with a mixture of peace and determination. "This house feels different now," she said softly. "It's yours," Evelyn replied.
"Truly yours this time."
Harper nodded. "For the first time in a long time, I feel like myself again." She took a step inside. Not as a victim.
Not as someone broken.
But as someone reborn. Justice had not erased the past, but it had given her back her future.